There's a moment in every conflict where one side stops posturing and starts pleading. That moment doesn't happen because of a speech or a press conference or a diplomatic summit. It happens because something on the battlefield shifts so fundamentally that the math no longer works. And that is exactly what we are watching unfold right now with Iran. I want you to sit with that for a second, because Iran does not beg. This is a regime that has spent 40 plus years positioning itself as the one power in the Middle East that doesn't bow. They fund proxy militias across 7 countries. They've harassed U.S. Navy vessels for decades, and they've openly celebrated attacking American troops. These are not people who wave the white flag easily. So when back-channel signals, diplomatic intermediaries, and open statements start suggesting Iran wants this to stop, you have to ask why. What changed on the ground, in the air, and at sea that flipped the calculus for a regime built on defiance? That's exactly what we're going to break down today. The full picture, layer by layer. I'm going to walk you through the military pressure that got us here, the strategic reality Iran is now staring at, and what any of this actually means going forward. My name is Ryan, former F-15E combat pilot, F-16 Thunderbird pilot, and current airline captain. I have flown strike packages, I have planned targeting missions, and I understand what it looks like when a military campaign starts working. I want to give you the professional pilot's read on this, not the political spin, not the cable news take, just the honest, ground-level analysis of what's happening and why it matters. Before we get into it, if you're new here, hit subscribe. We cover military aviation, geopolitics, and global conflict through the lens of someone who actually flew the jets. And drop a comment below. I want to know, do you think Iran's signals are genuine, or is this just a stalling tactic? Let's get into it. First, let's be precise about what we mean when we say Iran begged. I want to flag up front that no Iranian official has gone on camera and said, please stop. That's not how this works. What we're seeing is a pattern of signals. Back-channel messages through Omani intermediaries, shifts in Iranian state media tone, and a sudden willingness to discuss terms they previously rejected outright. Take this with a grain of salt, because some of these reports come from sources with obvious interest in how this story gets told. That said, the pattern is real, and it is significant. Iran's foreign minister has made public statements in recent months that are dramatically softer than the rhetoric we've heard for decades. Words like dialogue and negotiated framework are appearing in the same sentences where Iran used to talk about resistance and martyrdom. That is not nothing. That is a regime recalibrating in real time. Here's why that matters from a strategic standpoint. Regimes like the Islamic Republic don't shift their public language unless the private pressure has become unbearable. Public language is the last thing they change, because changing it costs them domestic credibility with their own hardliners. So if the words are softening publicly, you can bet the internal conversations are significantly more desperate. I want to be fair and balanced here. Some analysts argue this is a negotiating tactic, not a genuine capitulation. The argument is that Iran has used diplomatic openings before to buy time, rebuild capability, and reemerge stronger. That's a legitimate read, and I'll come back to it later in this video. But first, I want to walk you through the military reality that is driving this moment, because that's where the real story is. Let's talk about what the US military has actually been doing, because this didn't happen overnight. The pressure campaign against Iran and its proxies has been building across multiple domains: air, sea, cyber, and through partner forces on the ground. Each layer has been compounding on the others, and the cumulative effect is what's producing the strategic desperation we're now seeing. I'm going to break this down domain by domain so you understand exactly how this works. Start with air power, because that's where I live and breathe professionally. The United States has demonstrated, repeatedly and publicly, that it can strike hardened targets deep inside Iranian-controlled or Iranian-allied territory with precision and near impunity. B-2 Spirit stealth bombers flew from the continental United States, struck targets, and returned home, a mission profile that Iran has no current answer for. Sit with that for a second. There is no air defense system Iran possesses today that reliably defeats a B-2 at altitude with a JDAM or a GBU-57 on the rail. The GBU-57, the massive ordnance penetrator, is not a weapon you use when you want to send a message. It's a weapon you use when you want to collapse something underground that previously felt safe. It is 30,000 pounds of precision-guided hardened case munition designed specifically to defeat fortified bunkers. When Iran watched those weapons impact their most protected infrastructure, every general in Tehran understood something they hadn't fully accepted before. Depth is no longer protection. Now layer in naval pressure. The U.S. Navy has been running sustained carrier strike group operations in the region, and the operational tempo has been significant. Multiple strike groups in theater simultaneously is not a routine rotation. That's a deliberate posture signal. When you park 2 or 3 carrier strike groups within range of your coastline, you're sending a message that doesn't require a translator. I want to flag something specific here because I think it gets underreported. The Navy's ability to sustain that kind of presence with the logistics, the replenishment, the rotational readiness is itself a demonstration of capability that Iran cannot match. Iran has fast attack craft, mines, anti-ship missiles, and proxy harassment assets in the Strait of Hormuz, but none of that translates into a credible counter to a coordinated carrier strike group operation with integrated air defense and subsurface support. Let's get specific, because vague talk about military pressure doesn't tell you anything useful. I want to walk through the categories of what Iran has materially lost in recent months and years, because the cumulative damage is more significant than any single headline suggests. I want to be clear, some of what I'm about to describe is confirmed, some is reported by multiple credible outlets, and some remains in the unconfirmed but credible category. I'll flag each one so you can calibrate accordingly. Category 1, proxy infrastructure. Iran's entire regional strategy is built on proxy forces. Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, Kataib, Hezbollah, and other factions in Iraq and Syria, and Hamas in Gaza. These are not just political allies. They are Iran's forward-deployed deterrent, her first line of offense, and her strategic depth when direct confrontation becomes too costly. In recent years, that infrastructure has taken hits that are genuinely unprecedented in their scope and precision. Hezbollah's senior military and intelligence leadership has been systematically degraded. I want to flag this as confirmed by multiple independent sources. The elimination of senior Hezbollah commanders, including figures responsible for strategic planning and weapons coordination, represents a loss that cannot be quickly replaced. Building that kind of trusted, experienced, compartmentalized leadership takes decades. You don't hire a replacement on a Tuesday and have them running precision operations by Thursday. Institutional knowledge doesn't work that way. Hamas's military capability inside Gaza has been substantially degraded. This is confirmed. The tunnel network, the weapons stockpiles, the command and control infrastructure that made Hamas a genuine military threat rather than just a political movement, all of it has been systematically targeted over a sustained campaign. What is unconfirmed and genuinely debated is the degree to which Hamas retains the ability to reconstitute, and how quickly. I'll be honest with you, I don't know the answer to that, and anyone who tells you they do with certainty is overstating what's knowable from open sources. Category 2, weapons resupply chains. Iran's ability to move weapons to its proxies, through Syria, through Iraq, through maritime routes, has been severely disrupted. This is a combination of Israeli airstrikes on Syrian logistics corridors, U.S. and partner interdiction operations, and the degradation of the physical infrastructure those shipments depended on. It is hard to overstate how damaging this is to Iran's regional strategy, because the proxies only matter if they're armed. An armed Hezbollah with precision missiles threatening northern Israel is a strategic asset for Tehran. A Hezbollah that is counting its remaining inventory and watching the resupply routes get cut is a liability. That distinction matters enormously when you're in Tehran trying to figure out what leverage you actually have. And right now, Tehran is looking at that ledger and the numbers are not good. Category 3, air defense architecture. This one is significant and I want to give it the weight it deserves. Iran spent years and considerable resources building an integrated air defense network. Russian-supplied S-300 batteries, domestically developed Bavar 373 systems, radar installations, and layered short-range defenses. The theory was that this network, combined with geographic depth and hardened sites, would make any strike on Iran prohibitively costly. That theory has been stress-tested, and it did not hold. Reports, confirmed by U.S. officials and independent analysts, indicate that portions of Iran's air defense radar network were struck or suppressed during recent exchanges. When your air defense radars go dark, your entire integrated system becomes significantly less capable because the individual components can't share targeting data effectively. I'll flag this as partially confirmed. The specific systems affected and the degree of permanent degradation are still being assessed by open source analysts, but the broad strokes are real. Iran's air defense umbrella has holes in it that weren't there before. Here's something that doesn't get enough attention in the military analysis space, and I want to spend real time on it because it's actually central to understanding Iran's current posture. Military capability doesn't exist in a vacuum. It exists inside an economy, and Iran's economy is in serious trouble. The sanctions regime, the currency collapse, the inflation, the youth unemployment, the brain drain, these aren't just inconveniences. They are structural constraints on Iran's ability to sustain a prolonged military posture. Let me give you a cockpit analogy here. When I'm flying a long mission, I'm constantly managing fuel state. Not just current fuel, but projected fuel at every waypoint and at the target. If my fuel math doesn't work at some point in the mission, I don't press forward hoping it'll sort itself out. I reassess, I adjust, and if necessary, I abort, because getting to the target is worthless if you can't get home. Iran is running a fuel emergency right now in economic terms. The rial has lost catastrophic value over the past several years. we're talking about an inflation environment that is genuinely destabilizing for ordinary Iranians. The regime has managed to hold on through a combination of repression, oil sales to China, and the ideological loyalty of its core base. But each of those stabilizers is under pressure in ways that are accelerating, not easing. Oil revenues, Iran's primary hard currency source, have been curtailed by sanctions enforcement. The China relationship has provided a lifeline, but Beijing is transactional, not altruistic. They buy Iranian oil at steep discounts because Iran has no other buyer, not because of solidarity. And the domestic repression required to hold the system together has costs. It generates international isolation. It alienates educated Iranians who then leave, and it consumes security resources that could otherwise support external operations. This is not a sustainable trajectory, and the people in Tehran who actually run the numbers know it. Now overlay the military spending requirements of sustaining proxy networks, air defense modernization, missile programs, and naval operations. These are expensive programs to maintain, and they're getting more expensive as Western technology restrictions bite harder. Iran is trying to sustain a regional military posture with an economy that is increasingly unable to support it. Something has to give, and what we may be watching right now is the moment the regime decided that some kind of accommodation is preferable to continued economic collapse. I want to talk specifically about the direct missile exchanges between Iran and Israel, because they revealed something critical about the strategic balance that I don't think got enough serious analysis in the mainstream coverage. Iran launched large waves of ballistic missiles and drones at Israel, and the overwhelming majority were intercepted. That's the headline most people remember. The defense worked. But I want to go one level deeper, because the real story is what that exchange cost Iran and what it demonstrated about the future. First, the offensive side. Iran expended a significant portion of a high-end missile inventory in those strikes. Ballistic missiles, especially the precision-guided variants Iran was firing, are not cheap, and they're not fast to replace under sanctions. The production rate for advanced ballistic missiles is constrained by access to guidance systems, specialized materials, and manufacturing expertise. When you burn through a meaningful portion of that inventory and achieve minimal effects on target, that is an extremely poor return on investment from a military standpoint. Second, the defensive revelation. Israel, with U.S. support, Jordanian airspace cooperation, and other partner contributions, demonstrated that a layered missile defense architecture can defeat a mass Iranian salvo. Arrow 3, David's sling, Patriot, and naval intercepts working in coordination produced an interception rate that stunned a lot of people. I want to flag that the exact numbers remain classified in some respects, but the broad outcome is confirmed. Iran's grand salvo failed to penetrate defenses effectively enough to cause strategic damage. Here's the professional pilot read on what that means. When you execute a mission and the defenses defeat you comprehensively, you don't just note the tactical loss. You have to reassess whether the fundamental approach is viable. Iran's deterrent strategy for years has rested on the implicit threat of missile saturation. Fire enough of them and some get through. The theory has now been field tested against a real integrated air defense and found wanting. The intercept performance was good enough that Iran cannot credibly threaten to saturate Israeli or American regional defenses with current inventory and current technology. To restore that threat, Iran would need significantly more missiles of significantly higher capability, and both the money and the technology access to get there are constrained. So the missile card, which was always Iran's most credible military trump card, is now substantially less impressive than it was 2 years ago. And Iran's military leadership knows this. They watched the same intercept footage we watched, and they did the same math. The gap between what their missiles can do and what the defenses can now absorb has widened in a direction that is very bad for Tehran. That is a significant driver of the posture shift we're seeing. People always bring up the Strait of Hormuz when Iran comes up, and I get it. It's a real constraint. Roughly 20% of the world's traded oil moves through that choke point, and Iran has long positioned the ability to close it as its ultimate economic weapon. The implicit threat has always been, push us too hard and we'll choke the global economy. I want to give you my honest professional read on why that card is weaker than the headlines suggest. First, closing the Strait of Hormuz is easy to threaten and very hard to sustain. Iran can absolutely create chaos there. Mines, fast attack boats, anti-ship missiles, and harassment of tankers can spike shipping costs and create genuine disruption in the short term. We've seen versions of this during tanker attacks in 2019 and subsequent incidents. Iran has the capacity to make Hormuz dangerous. But dangerous is different from closed, and closed for a week is very different from closed for a month. Here's the operational reality from a naval warfare perspective. The United States Navy and its partners have spent decades planning and rehearsing Hormuz contingencies. Mine countermeasure operations, escort convoy procedures, carrier strike group positioning to suppress Iranian shore-based anti-ship capability. This is not new territory for U.S. naval planners. Would it be costly and complicated? Absolutely. Would Iran win a sustained Hormuz confrontation against a committed U.S. naval response? The honest answer is no. The second problem with the Hormuz card is that Iran also needs the strait. Iran exports what oil it does export through the Gulf. Closing Hormuz doesn't just hurt global markets, it hurts Iran's already strangled revenue streams. A country that is already in economic distress does not improve its situation by also cutting off its own export routes. The threat only works if the other side believes you're willing to absorb that self-inflicted wound. And Tehran's economic situation makes that hard to believe. Third, and this is important, the global energy landscape has changed. U.S. shale production, LNG export infrastructure, and the development of alternative energy routes have reduced the acute leverage that Hormuz represented a decade ago. A Hormuz disruption in 2026 is painful, but it's less catastrophic than it would have been in 2010. Iran's negotiators are sophisticated enough to understand that their best threat has depreciated in value. Let me come back to the proxy network, because I want to give it a dedicated section, because this is arguably the most consequential dimension of what's changed. Iran's entire regional strategy for the past 4 decades has been what strategists call forward defense through proxies. Keep the fight as far from Iranian soil as possible, impose costs on adversaries through asymmetric warfare, and maintain plausible deniability. It's a sophisticated strategy, and it worked remarkably well for a long time. The problem is that the strategy has been systematically dismantled in ways Iran did not anticipate at the pace they're experiencing. Hezbollah is the most important case study here. For decades, Hezbollah was Iran's premier strategic asset, a battle-hardened, politically powerful, financially resourced organization with a missile arsenal that genuinely threatened Israeli population centers and gave Iran direct leverage over Israeli decision-making. That asset has been significantly degraded by a combination of sustained Israeli operations, the decapitation of senior leadership, and the attrition of the precision missile inventory that made Hezbollah so threatening. I want to flag that the full extent of Hezbollah's current capability is genuinely unclear from open sources. But the direction of change is confirmed. They are weaker today than they were 3 years ago. The Houthis in Yemen are a more complicated picture. They have demonstrated genuine capability, successful drone and missile strikes on commercial shipping, Red Sea disruption that has rerouted global trade, and a resilience under airstrikes that has surprised a lot of analysts. But here's the honest read. Houthi operations impose costs on global commerce, not on U.S. or Israeli military capability. There's a meaningful difference between being able to disrupt container shipping and being able to defeat a U.S. carrier strike group or degrade Israel's military capability. Iraq-based proxies, Kataib Hezbollah and related factions, have been targeted repeatedly and with increasing precision. U.S. strikes on militia command centers, weapons storage facilities, and leadership figures in Iraq and Syria have been sustained and deliberate. The message is that there is no sanctuary for Iranian-directed forces targeting U.S. personnel and infrastructure. That message has been received, even if it hasn't been publicly acknowledged. Hamas is in the most difficult position of all Iran's proxies. The organization launched October 7th as a strategic gambit. The theory, apparently, was that it would trigger a regional escalation that would overwhelm Israel and draw in Hezbollah, Iran, and other actors simultaneously. That gambit failed in a specific and important way. It triggered a massive Israeli military response that has systematically dismantled Hamas's military infrastructure. The regional escalation that Hamas needed to survive didn't materialize at the scale required, partly because Iran calculated, correctly, that direct full-scale war with Israel and the United States was not survivable for the regime. So here is where Iran's proxy network stands today. Hezbollah weakened. Hamas militarily devastated. Iraqi proxies under sustained pressure. Houthis active but strategically limited in what they can achieve against military targets. This is the worst shape Iran's proxy infrastructure has been in since the strategy was built. And rebuilding it requires money, weapons, and time, all 3 of which are in short supply. Here's a dimension that I think deserves serious attention even though it's harder to quantify than missile inventories or proxy capabilities. The Iranian regime is facing significant internal pressure from its own population, and that pressure has not gone away even though the 2022 protests were suppressed. I want to be careful here because I'm not predicting regime collapse. That's a prediction that Iran watchers have been making for 30 years and have been repeatedly wrong about. But the internal dynamics are relevant to understanding why the regime's risk tolerance may be decreasing. The Masa Amini protests in 2022 were the most significant challenge to the regime in decades. They spread across every major Iranian city. They included demographics, young women, educated professionals, ethnic minorities, that the regime had previously counted on as politically passive. The regime suppressed them through arrests, violence, and intimidation. But you don't suppress a protest movement and then just move on. The underlying grievances that produced it don't disappear. Iran's youth population is one of the most educated and internet-connected in the region. They have access to information that previous generations didn't, and they can see the gap between Iran's potential and the reality of life under sanctions and authoritarian governance. The brain drain is real. Iran consistently loses a significant portion of its most educated and entrepreneurially capable citizens to emigration. That's not just a social tragedy, it's a structural economic and military problem. You can't build sophisticated weapon systems and run complex military operations if your engineers and scientists keep leaving. The regime is also dealing with succession uncertainty. Supreme Leader Khamenei is elderly and in reportedly declining health. I'll flag that specific health details are unconfirmed from reliable sources, but his age and length of tenure are public record. The question of what comes after Khamenei is a genuine source of internal factional competition. And factional competition makes bold, external military adventurism riskier because a military failure becomes political ammunition for rivals. In a system where succession is contested, no faction wants to own a catastrophic military defeat. Let me give you the direct professional assessment of what the U.S. military has demonstrated in this period, because I think it matters for understanding why Iran is recalibrating. I've flown military aircraft, I've been part of the planning process for complex strikes, and I want to give you an honest read of what this campaign has shown. This is not cheerleading, it's assessment. And the assessment is, the United States has demonstrated a level of precision, reach, and persistence that the Iranians did not fully account for. The B-2 strikes on hardened targets were a demonstration of reach, the ability to deliver massive ordnance from the continental United States to targets on the other side of the planet without staging from regional bases. That matters, because it means Iran cannot reduce U.S. strike capability by pressuring regional partners not to allow access. You don't need a base in Qatar or Bahrain if you can reach any target from Missouri. That is a strategic reality that changes the calculus for any adversary thinking about how to limit American military options. The precision of strikes on leadership targets, on infrastructure, on weapon storage has been operationally significant. The days when you could protect something by putting it underground or inside a city and counting on American reluctance to accept civilian casualties are not over, but they're harder. Precision-guided munitions guided by real-time intelligence from multiple collection platforms, signals intelligence, imagery, human sources, partner intelligence, have made targeting more accurate than any previous era of warfare. Iran watched this applied to Hezbollah and Hamas leadership, and they understood the implication for their own leadership's vulnerability. The sustained operational tempo, the ability to keep pressure on across multiple theaters simultaneously, is also significant. U.S. forces struck Houthi targets in Yemen, militia targets in Iraq and Syria, and supported Israeli operations in Gaza and Lebanon effectively simultaneously. That kind of multi-theater sustained operation requires logistics, intelligence, command, and control, and readiness that few militaries in the world can sustain. Iran looked at that operational tempo and understood they are not in the same category. I want to be clear about something. None of this means the U.S. military is perfect or that these operations have been without cost or complexity. There have been challenges, mistakes, and tragedies. American service members have died in these exchanges, and that matters enormously, both as human tragedy and as strategic reality. But the aggregate demonstration of American military capability in this period has been significant enough to shift the strategic calculus in Tehran. Now here's the question that actually matters going forward. What does Iran expect to get out of signaling a desire to de-escalate? I want to be analytically honest here, because there are multiple possible Iranian strategies at play, and only some of them represent genuine capitulation. Understanding which one you're dealing with determines how you should respond, and that matters for American strategic decision-making going forward. Option 1. Genuine strategic recalibration. In this scenario, the Iranian leadership has genuinely concluded that the current trajectory, continued proxy attrition, economic deterioration, military capability degradation, and increasing internal pressure, leads to regime instability. The calculation would be better to negotiate from a weakened position now than to negotiate from an even weaker position later, or to risk a military escalation that the regime cannot survive. This is a rational calculation, and there are historical precedents. Iran's acceptance of a ceasefire with Iraq in 1988 is the most relevant one. Khomeini described it as drinking poison, but he did it because the alternative was worse. Option 2. Tactical pause for strategic reconstitution. This is the more cynical read, and it's the one that experienced Iran watchers are most cautious about. In this scenario, Iran is signaling de-escalation, not because it has changed its goals, but because it needs time. Time to rebuild proxy infrastructure, time to advance its nuclear program under reduced scrutiny, time to let international pressure on Israel build, and time to wait for a change in American political leadership that might be more favorable. Iran has done this before, used diplomatic openings as breathing room rather than as genuine change of direction. The 2015 nuclear deal period, from Iran's perspective, was partly about getting sanctions relief while not actually abandoning nuclear ambitions, at least according to the critics of that deal. Option 3. Internal factional signaling. It's possible that what looks like a unified Iranian signal is actually a factional message. The pragmatist elements within the regime are testing whether there's a diplomatic off-ramp available without necessarily having the backing of the hardliners or the Revolutionary Guard. Iranian politics are not monolithic, and messages that appear to come from Iran sometimes actually represent one faction trying to move the whole system in a direction that other factions resist. Understanding which faction is driving the current signals matters a lot for assessing how durable any de-escalation would be. I don't know with certainty which of these scenarios is operative, and I'd be skeptical of anyone who claims they do. What I do know is that the conditions that produce these signals are real. The military and economic pressure is real, and the degradation of Iran's strategic position is real. Whether Tehran translates that into a genuine strategic shift or a tactical pause is something that will only become clear through their actions over the coming months. All right. Here's the direct synthesis. No hedging, no diplomatic language. Iran is signaling a desire to de-escalate because the current trajectory is genuinely unsustainable from their perspective. Their proxy network is degraded, their missile arsenal has been exposed as less decisive than advertised, their economy is under severe structural stress, their air defense architecture has holes in it, and their population is restless. That is a combination of pressures that even a regime with 40 years of survival experience has to take seriously. The United States and its partners, primarily Israel, have demonstrated a level of military capability, sustained operational tempo, and strategic coherence that Iran did not plan for. The B-2 strikes proved reach, the proxy leadership decapitation proved precision. The missile defense performance proved resilience. Taken together, these demonstrations have shifted the military balance in ways that are durable, not temporary. And Iran's leadership, whatever their public posture, understands this. That said, and this is important, Iran begging to stop is not the same as Iran changing. The regime's goals, regional hegemony, elimination of Israel as a political project, expulsion of American influence from the Middle East, have not changed because they're under pressure. Goals are stubborn things. What changes under pressure is willingness to pursue those goals through the current means, at the current cost, at the current risk level. The question that American and Israeli strategic planners are wrestling with right now is, do you take the de-escalation opening, or do you press the advantage? There are serious arguments on both sides, and I'm not going to pretend there's an obvious answer. Taking the opening risks, giving Iran the breathing room it needs to reconstitute. Pressing the advantage risks escalation beyond the current parameters. And escalation with a nuclear threshold state always carries risks that are not fully controllable. Here's my pilot's eye view take on it. In combat aviation, when you have an adversary at a disadvantage, you press that advantage, but not recklessly. You press it in ways that are controlled, that maintain your own options, and that don't expose you to an unrecoverable situation. The strategic equivalent is continuing to maintain pressure while being clear about what a genuine, verifiable change in Iranian behavior would look like, and being ready to respond to genuine change without rewarding tactical deception. The regime that is begging to stop today is the same regime that funded the attack on American troops at Tower 22. It's the same regime that armed Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis. It's the same regime that has been pursuing nuclear capability under cover of civilian programs for decades. Pressure brought them to this moment. Maintaining calibrated, intelligent pressure is what determines whether this moment produces lasting change or just a temporary pause. That is the full picture as I understand it. The military pressure, the economic reality, the proxy degradation, the strategic revelation of the missile exchanges, and the honest uncertainty about what Iran's signals actually mean. I've tried to flag throughout where the evidence is confirmed, where it's credible but unverified, and where genuine uncertainty exists. That's the standard I hold myself to on this channel, because you deserve analysis that respects your intelligence. If you found this useful, hit subscribe. We break down military operations, geopolitics, and conflict analysis through a professional pilot's lens consistently on this channel. And I want to hear from you in the comments. Do you think Iran's signals represent genuine strategic recalibration, or is this a tactical pause to buy time and rebuild? That's the central question that determines everything about how this situation develops, and I genuinely want to know what you think. I'll be back soon with the next breakdown. Until then, stay sharp.